Here's the shares of Boeing. They're actually up 1% this morning. The company said it's going to add a short-term credit agreement worth $10 billion with a consortium of banks, including Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and Citigroup. Meanwhile, the company also filed a registration statement with the U.S. Markets regulator for a securities and stock sale of up to $25 billion. Meanwhile, Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg facing several major challenges just a month after 30,000 machinists walked off the job. Our next guest says Ortberg has a unique chance to repair the damage. Joining us now, Gautam Mukunda is a professor of management practice at the Yale School of Management. And explain, how is this? It sounds good. I love silver linings, but how is this a possible positive for the company and the CEO? Professor.
So when he came in, he had a chance to do that. And we got to think back in the context of what Boeing labor relations are like. For more than a generation, Boeing's unions had been screaming that management was destroying the company. And at this point, basically everyone looks at Boeing and says, well, the unions were right. The central critique they made, that the management had focused on short-term profits and destroyed Boeing's engineering excellence, I don't know anyone who denies that anymore. That is just true. But over the span of a generation, whatever trust that might have existed between managers and the workforce of Boeing has just been devastated. I just want to sort of emphasize this, right? Jim McNerney, the CEO of Boeing, a couple of CEOs ago, actually said, right, when he was asked if he was going to retire at 65, said, "Why would I still do that? The heart is still beating and the employees are still cowering." That was the attitude that Boeing management had. When Kelly Ortberg came in from outside, a trained engineer, someone who had a history of working well with labor, he had a chance to reset that and say, look, I understand that my predecessors were doing these things and I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm a little surprised that he hasn't done more to seize it.
How do you see the negotiations playing out? And we are at an interesting point in terms of labor in the United States, given what we've seen and what we're seeing. In terms of it really is what do you call it? There's a buyer and seller's market, but it is a worker's market, I would think, right now. You can ask for things, and the company needs to listen. How does this play out?
Right. So it is a workers' market, and it's particularly a workers' market for Boeing workers because these sorts of skilled machinists who are the key to Boeing, they've already lost a lot of their most experienced and their best workers. That is one of the reasons for these pervasive quality problems. They really can't afford to lose too many more. And the other issue here is that touch labor, the people who actually have their hands on and are putting the plane together, only account for about 5% of the total cost of an aircraft. So there's a lot of room to play to increase that. But what I would suggest is this isn't just about money. Right, so Ortberg started in exactly the right way. He declared that he was going to work out of Seattle because Boeing's job was building airplanes and he needed to be there to do it right. But since then, you've seen things like Boeing going directly to the workers instead of working with union negotiators, them withdrawing their final offer, cutting off health care for workers. What I'd say is, if I were Boeing, what I would do is instead of trying to play hardball, the strategy they've done for a generation and that has nearly destroyed the company, I would sort of reach out to the union and say, we need a relationship of mutual respect, and maybe that's about more than money. Maybe that's about doing things like offering the workers some levels of a say in how the company is managed for the next few years. Because I mean, they couldn't possibly do worse than the last few CEOs of Boeing.
Where do you think the weaknesses were that led to some of the quality issues? And what would you do if you were Kelly Ortberg? What are the most important positions under him to get right?
So he needs to make sure, I mean, he is an engineer. He needs to make sure that his head of Boeing Commercial is an engineer, or at least someone who respects engineers, who understands them. He needs to get down on the needs to get down on the shop floor, walk around and talk with these people and say, why are you doing why are these mistakes happening in the most concrete way? And he needs to change the culture of Boeing. What we've seen over and over and over again is that the workers who are trying to do their job well, who blow the whistle, who say, look, we have a safety problem, get punished, get harassed, get fired, get moved out, get demoted, get sort of treated in every possible way badly. That is how you make sure that nothing of high quality is ever built. So changing that culture is going to require some pretty profound reforms, and it's not going to be a one-year process.
Yeah, Gautam, I hear what you're saying. Is it too late based on the early moves the company's made under the new CEO, or is there still the ability to turn that around, especially when we hear that the big sticking point is the return of a pension?
Yeah, I don't think it's too late, at least in part because officially or unofficially, Boeing has a backstop. It is just too important to American manufacturing for the U.S. government to allow it to fail. There will be interventions that make sure that this company keeps going forward because it is just inconceivable. If there's one thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on, is that the U.S. should be a leading manufacturing company, and the U.S. is not should be a leading manufacturing country, and the U.S. is not going to be a leading manufacturing country without Boeing. It is not going to happen. But what I would say is he needs to get involved with the labor negotiations because Boeing's current negotiators seem to be acting the way Boeing's negotiators have acted for the last few decades, and that's not working. He needs to say, we're going to do this differently. This is a CEO-level intervention that he needs to make.